Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Joseph Ryder Anderson podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Anderson, and today we have something super exciting planned, and that is we're going to be talking about and taking a look at the upcoming Union Arena meta post Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. We're going to be taking a look at various decks, looking at some resources on the website. If you're not familiar with the website, that is josephryderanderson.com. That's where all the latest and greatest content can be found. And we're also going to be looking at a tier list, looking at all of the decks in the Union Arena format, post Fullmetal Alchemist, and how they stack up, and the reason for why they stack up the way they do. So if you're watching on YouTube, you'll be either happy or sad to know that this indeed is now currently a video podcast. Just for those who don't know the history of what happened here, this podcast started out as a non-video podcast. I didn't even have it on YouTube. Since adding to YouTube, it's gotten a lot of traction. A lot of people have been asking me to do video, and so I thought I'd humor everyone and throw a video on this, see if it helps get some of these concepts across a little more clearly. But of course, the best place to get these resources up to date is still on the website, www.josephryderanderson.com. These deck resources are constantly updated. I was just up to 2 a.m. last night updating my best Union Arena decks guide, which we'll be taking a look at. So make sure you check that out. And there's a link. There'll be a link to the guide in the episode notes and description for those on YouTube, listed on YouTube. Okay, so with that little bit of intro, let's go ahead and dive in. So we're going to be taking a look at the best decks. We'll take a sort of a cursory glance here and then go into these decks in a little more detail. Interestingly enough, despite a lot of people thinking that when Blue JJK would come, Volume 2 came out, that it would just completely dominate the meta, from what I've been seeing in tournament results, it still looks like Purple Bleach is the most consistently top performing deck. As the regionals, by the way, we have a couple of regionals coming up, which is super exciting. I'll be going to at least one of them. We're probably going to get a stronger idea of where the meta is at and where these decks stack up and figure out what the definitive deck is. But for right now, this Purple Bleach with the Squad Zero build seems to be the preferential best deck in format. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's very few decks really that can do what this deck can do. Very few decks that have the kind of access to removal that this deck has. Few decks that have access to a powerful site like the Royal Palace. We'll be taking a look at another deck list that runs a few more of these even. So it's really just a powerful deck when you have a removal tool like the 5-cost Ichigo, a removal tool like the Senjumaru, both fantastic at taking out 4K or more characters. When you have this, you're running this starter deck Ichigo, right? He can do impact, draw a card, and then the really big bad guy, which is Ichigo, the 4-cost Ichigo. And I think this guy really is what made people want to play this deck, because if you run him with this full Squad Zero build, he's pretty reliably becoming a damage to impact one character at just a 4-cost with Nullify Impact. Really, really strong card. So this is really the deck that I'm seeing showing up the most at the top at tournaments. So if you're looking for a deck that has powerful removal and powerful card search, this is probably not going to steer you wrong. Let's dive a little bit more into how some of these cards are impacting this deck. Again, let's take a look at this guy, your Ichigo Kurosaki. Just a really solid card. You don't have to put in that much work to get this guy powered up. The only negative about him is he does come in raidless, so what a lot of people will do is they'll just play him to their back line so he doesn't get picked off too quickly, promote him up, and then assuming you meet these prerequisites, which for him is actually not too much. You can, in this deck, probably the easiest thing to do is just have two distinct named, so it says unique names is what they call them in Union Arena, unique named Squad Zero characters in your removal area, and he gets damage too. And then if you just have 4, which is, again, in this deck, not hard to do, he gets damage 2 and impact 1. So a lot of people just play him to the energy line so he doesn't get taken out, and then the next turn he's coming in hot, and forcing your opponent to deal with him. The only way to deal with this guy, assuming that he comes in that way and you haven't had time to get rid of him, is just to have a Nullify Impact. So if with this deck being so dominant, I definitely think having access to Nullify Impact characters in your deck is pretty important, just to deal with him a little bit more easily. I think a huge differentiator, this is a list that won a tournament recently. This site card, holy cow, the rise of sites in Union Arena has been something super interesting to see, because for a while there, it just felt like people, the play style for the English meta for a long time was a bit rushy, right? So people really wanted to be coming in aggressively, taking a lot of life early. And that made sites not that preferred, right? Because if you have a site on your energy line, you can't promote it to replace the guy that got taken out the last turn. With the game becoming more complex, a little more interesting, sites are becoming a huge differentiator. And this is one of the best sites. The fact that you can set it to active onto your field and then use it the very turn you play it, and most likely draw a card for just for free, is pretty insane. As someone pointed out, I think it was the Union Arena deck guides guy pointed out on one of my comments, this is also a great way to fuel your sideline. It can be used for that way too, right? You can just quickly get cards into your sideline to power up your 5-cost Ichigo and take out some removal, do some removal against some powerful characters. Just a really solid deck. Probably number one as of right now. Of course, that's likely to change as more big events come out, but definitely a solid deck. Moving on now to the Sukin Anonym deck. This deck is doing really well in the tournament scene right now. It is just killing it, honestly. Showing up at the top of several tournaments. And I think one of the reasons for why maybe this was slept on a little bit by a lot of people, I think a lot of people assumed that the blue Sukina, the blue JJK, pure Sukina build would be the way to go. I think it might be partly because people thought we might get a limit on the starter deck Sukina. I believe in Japan Sukina is limited, so I think a lot of people assumed we'd get a limit on this guy, which of course would make this deck a little less consistent and strong. But without that limit going on, this deck turns out to be really, really solid. It's a little bit more versatile. The way I think of this deck is it's sort of like a greatest hits album for the blue energy color in JJK. And with some of the new tools that came to this deck for Nanami, it makes thinning out your deck and getting to your powered up 4-cost Nanami with his, let's go pop in and look at this, with his impact 1 and damage 2. So you get this, you have 15 cards or less in your deck. That just gets a lot easier. And that's so deadly, right? You're getting the same kind of a thing as the purple Ichigo, impact 1, damage 2 at 4-cost. You just have to hit 15 or cards less in your deck, and you have cards that make that easier to do. Let's take a look. You have this guy, place the top card of your deck into your sideline. Also acts as a raid target. I believe this guy does a similar kind of thing. Place up to 1 card from the top of your deck into your sideline. Yep. Super, super strong. And then let's take a look at the new raid. This guy's in this deck. This deck won a tournament. It's at 3. They're running 3 copies in this deck. When played, choose up to 1 character in your opponent's front line. It gains this character cannot attack until the start of your next turn. That's fantastic. Really a good defensive line there. And then again, when attacking, place up to 1 card from the top of your deck into your sideline. So you're getting just a lot more mill with this deck than you used to, making this a much more feasible strategy. And this deck was already really strong as it was. So having access to that is pretty crazy. Next up, Yellow Saitama. It's always interesting to see when decks age well. Yellow Saitama did really well when it came out, and in some ways it's more relevant today than it was when it came out because of how strong some of these removal decks are. And this deck is definitely that anti-removal deck. Yellow Saitama will still go fairly well, even into this purple Ichigo build with the Squad Zero. I think it has a little bit more trouble against the Nanami. That could be why Nanami is doing so well, partly because, One Punch Man is still at large. But the Nanami can at least lock him down or freeze him down during an attack or when you're defending. But overall, Yellow Saitama still putting in the work. This is the build that had been really popular, but there is another deck that did well at a tournament. This is sort of the alternate way to build this deck around, which I think this was always the version I actually liked best around this Silverfang. The Silverfang is just really strong, and he's a great attacker. He's a stronger attacker than the Hellish Blizzard, and he has a protective effect, so you get even more protection on your characters. This deck is running the 2 action point Saitama, which can remove. So you get a little added removal there. And also, again, the site. So sites are, as I said, super prominent in the today's meta. And this gives you a little bit of more searching power. So just a really strong deck. Of course, the really big selling point is the Saitama, the 5-cost Saitama, who is your anti-removal option, and that's really what makes this deck sing, is that you cannot get rid of this guy. He's on the field. He's going to stay on the field for the most part, with a few exceptions. Really the best way is to either lock him down with the goddesses, which we'll get to in a moment, or to freeze him down. But either which way, he's not most likely going anywhere, especially not into the 2 top decks. So just a really powerful anti-meta tool here. Moving on to now blue Sukuna. So I could totally see this deck rising up higher, even being number 1 as people figure out how to play it a bit more. We'll take a look at a slightly different build here. But I think that this deck has not been really dominating the meta as I would have assumed. But that could just be because people are taking a little bit to figure out how to play it. It definitely has a much different play style than it used to. So the way it is now, it has a bunch of cards. Let's take a look at some of them. This is a new card in Volume 2. If you have a Sukin in your sideline, this character becomes a 2 energy gen character. And it's also got the color trigger. So this is a much stronger color trigger than what you used to have access in blue Sukuna. And then you have this guy during your turn. If you have 1 or more Sukin fingers in your sideline, reduce the card energy of all cards by 1. If you have 4 or more, it's 2. So this is what's happening here is this deck is playing a lot more into the finger strategy. So it's on the one hand, it's giving you a lot stronger abilities than you ever had access to in blue Sukuna. At the same time, it is making you more dependent on finding those fingers and getting them into your sideline. So the strength and the weaknesses of this deck in some ways have just become more exaggerated, but it's definitely still super strong. Speaking of sites, one of the strongest offensive sites in the game, if not probably the strongest offensive site, is this Malevolent Shrine, which just boosts your Sukuna characters to an insane power level, making them crazy strong. So this is, again, the dominance of sites. If there's one thing I could highlighted this last video when I did a meta predictions, and it's not changed. In some ways, it's just gotten more of a thing with sites just becoming more and more powerful in the game, and there's so few cards that can actually deal with them. So that's just something to keep in mind as we look at some more decks here. But yeah, watch for this deck rising up more in the meta. I think as people figure out how to play this more control-heavy guy, people will also get additional success with this deck. But still easily in the S tier, top tier decks right now. Moving on, Code Geass, purple. I won't talk about this too much because this deck really hasn't changed that much. It's a classic for a reason. It's strong, powerful, reliable, good at offense, good at defense. It's just one of the most consistently powerful decks in the game. It's also one of my favorites to play. I've played this deck quite a bit. I think one of your most powerful tools in this deck is the Gurren. So the Gurren is really what is always what has set this deck apart for me. The Gawain is also really powerful. Having that minusing 1,000 can't be blocked is way handier than you might think. But this Gurren coming in, forcing a block and granting you impact, you can even power this up with Checkmate if you like that kind of a tech. This is just really a gold standard kind of a card in this deck, and one of the reasons why this deck is still doing really well, although it has slipped. I'm not seeing it topping every single tournament. We'll see what happens when we get to some of the regionals. But this deck is definitely slowing down a little bit, and I think that's good because it was really kind of so, I would say, dominant for such a long time that having it slip a little bit is just more leveling the playing field, not like hurting the game whatsoever. Next up, we have the Toto Mekamaru deck. So I think I have another one that did really well at a tournament we can take a look at here. But really what I love about this deck, there's 2 cards that I really love about this deck. We'll talk about Toto first. And this guy, the only reason he hasn't been a bigger force in the meta is he just didn't have like the peripheral support to make him that bigger force in the meta. But now he does, as you're going to see. But this guy has damage too, just from being rated. But his really powerful effect is this character gains 2,000 BP until the end of the turn. So he's a 6,000 BP attacker. That's crazy. And then you may choose one character on both your opponent's front line and energy line and swap them. That's insane. So you can really mess up your opponent's energy line. While this is crazy effective against high energy green decks, it's also effective against any deck because a lot of the lower energy decks that run like a max of 4 energy 4 energy characters, 4 energy cost characters, they'll only run a couple copies or a few copies, relatively few copies of those 2 energy gen characters. So if you can pull one of those up and they don't find another, it can be really hard for them to bounce back from that. So this is just like just a precision powerful card. And then the other card I would like to highlight that makes this deck so strong is the Ultimate Mechamaru Mode Absolute 6-cost character, but you're running kind of a high cost energy line anyway. It's not a big deal. He gains impact if you have 5 or more other Kyoto Jujutsu High Affinity cards, or Kasumi Miwa on your field. That makes it a lot easier. This character gains impact. When played, this is the real kicker here. This is the really strong thing. And again, I've said this last time, but I'll say it again. Whenever you have a card that gives you the option between effects, that's a very strong thing, because what it's doing is it's giving you like a Swiss Army knife tool, so that you can adjust this to fit the situation that you're facing. So you can either sideline a character on your opponent's field with 3,500 less BP, or you can choose up to 1 site on your opponent's field and sideline it. That also works on 2 energy gen sites. So this works on any site, just straight up sidelining it. That's an incredibly powerful move against Royal Palace, an incredibly powerful move against Malevolent Shrine, and it's a powerful move against all the other sites. You can just really slow your opponent down, especially if your opponent's not running that many copies of their site, thinking they're safe. You can really slow down their deck and edge out a win with just this card alone. So super, super solid. I think another card to look at here is this guy. And his when played, if you have 5 or more other Kyoto Jujutsu High Affinity cards or a Kasumi Miwa on your field, choose up to 1 character in opponent's front line, it loses 1,000 BP until the end of the turn. That's important. So this is the Kokichi Muta card, and 3 cost, has the color trigger. Great card to have the color trigger on, because you're definitely going to want to run this, and this makes it much more feasible to hit higher targets with your Mechamaru sidelining. So whether you're facing down a deck that you want to get rid of a site, or you're facing down a deck with a powerful character in the front line that you'd rather not be facing down, your Mechamaru has the tools that you need to deal with them. So definitely top tier, especially in the current format. And another deck very similar in its advantage, a deck, my personal favorite deck, is the SAO Yellow Goddesses deck. So this is my list. I went actually on like a 5 tournament win spree undefeated, which was pretty crazy. The spree just ended with my loss at a Bleach rare battle, which I was not. I really was really into the Sword Art Online rare battle. The Bleach rare battle is a little tough because there's so much purple that it just kind of becomes a situation of who just gets the better removal. But I found the Sword Art Online rare battle super fun, super diverse in terms of a lot of variety in terms of deck choice. But this is my build, so I think what I like about this deck is just this particular build is just super consistent. So I very rarely brick with this build. You can just look at the energy line. You can see that it's just a very solid energy line, very easy to build up. I'm running 2 of these, 2 full sets of 2 energy gen characters, which makes it very easy to have the energy you need since you're not going over 4. And then the real call out is this unlimited landscape manipulation ability. So we're going to take a look at another build that is kind of popular that people like. And that one focuses a little more on the Yu-Gi-Oh play. So it's running 4 of these Yu-Gi-Ohs, granting 1,000 BP, and then making for an excellent raid target for this very solid Yu-Gi-Oh character with impact and impact 1 and nullify impact. You're not going to use his when sideline in this build. And then you also have the Silica to grant 1,000 BP. So I'm going over this. This sort of an alternate build. I'm assuming you probably already know what these cards do, but if you don't, the Asena is just so strong. You don't really want to use her if you don't have to until you get to. There are some scenarios. I will say there are some scenarios where you use this, but for the most part, you're using this effect when you get to 4 life or less, because then you are locking down a card. You want to focus on a card that can't be rated over, locking that card on the back line. This works against yellow Saitama. This works against any sort of card that you face, forcing them, actually except for one. Actually, the one card this effect doesn't work on is the 2 action point Kenpachi from Toshiro. So his card specifically says he cannot be moved to the energy line. So, but for the most part, this effect works on most cards. And then the next turn they can't move. So this is a very powerful way to take a card out of the game. And it also can be used in a similar way as Toto earlier in the game to mess up your opponent's energy line. But I think the card that is really standing out to me Oh, this deck's not running it. That's a bad example. But the deck that really stands out to me is that unlimited. The card that really stands out to me is that unlimited landscape manipulation ability. This is it's a 4-cost event card, and it lets you, similar kind of thing, it gives you multiple options. You can choose up to one character on your opponent's front line and switch it with a character on their energy line with 1 energy cost or less. So that's like the Asena effect, but without the locking down. But the really powerful thing is you can choose up to one site with 1 or less energy generation on your opponent's front field and sideline it. That is such a powerful effect, and one of the only effects that does that in the game right now, which gives this deck a leg up again in the current format that's so site driven. So again, you can use this to take out a Malevolent Shrine. You can use this to take out what's that one called? Oh, the Royal Palace. Just a super strong tech in this otherwise very strong deck. And then we have Blue Aincrad. Wow. Let me see if I can find this one for you. I have a more recent build. Here we go. Super strong deck. This is like if you've played Union Arena long enough, you're gonna notice that there's certain archetypes, right? Certain kinds of archetypes that they change as different sets come out, but a lot of times the decks fall within these. And this one is the king of the multi-attack deck archetype in Union Arena. There's a lot of decks that do the multi-attack, but none do it quite as well as Blue Sao Aincrad. The key card in this deck is the Kirito, the 5-cost Kirito, and he is going to let you switch. He can switch with an Asena on your energy line to get more attacks off, and he can also let you switch a character during your main phase. So this is the key card of this deck, and that might not sound super crazy, but when you look at what the Asenas do when they get switched, like this Asena gaining 1,000 and also impact if she's moved outside of your movement phase, or this Asena who's only a 2-cost and becomes a 4,000 PP character if she's moved, or this Asena that lets you draw a card but also has impact just by having Kirito on the field. It's really the interplay between Asena and Kirito that makes this deck so strong. And as if all of that multi-attack wasn't enough, you also have this 4-cost Kirito that grants double attack. So this is not a deck that you're using to strategically remove characters to gain an advantage over your opponent. This is a deck that you're just going all-out offensive. Once you get your board set up, you're going on an all-out offensive to take as much life as possible. And it's really effective in the current meta. I think it does well into a lot of the different decks, especially decks that like to take a lot of hits in order to keep their guys alive. You can really make that a punishing play towards the end of the game by getting so many attacks off at once. So this is definitely the preferred multi-attack deck and a very solid option if you're looking for that kind of a strategy. Next up at number 9, we have the Ichigo Rukia build, and this is actually my personal preferred way to build Purple Bleach. So we've had a version of this deck since the base set of Bleach. Back then it was the Ichigo Renji build, which is actually I have a build I wanted to look at if we have time. There is a build that does still do that Renji build, but I really like the Rukia build, and actually I even like to go heavier on the Rukia with the 3-cost as well, because she's just so strong if you can get her off. Let's take a look, see if we have this here. Here we go. This is from Unionversity, I believe. So this is the deck he used to get first in the Rumble Rama. And just really solid. You do have that, again, this Ichigo, 4-cost raidless Ichigo. He's not going to be gaining that impact 1, though, in this strategy. He's just going to be getting the damage 2, but still. I was just in a tournament recently where that damage 2 was definitely a painful thing to deal with. It basically forces you to have to either sacrifice powerful characters or take extra hits that you don't want to take. And in a narrow matchup, that can really put you ahead. So definitely don't underestimate that guy. But the real star of the show that makes this deck work is the Rukia. So the Rukia engine, she is so much stronger now that you have this 2-cost Rukia. We didn't get the 0-cost, but the 2. I can see why we didn't, because it's so strong already with the 2-cost. But this character just gives you a solid character with the active trigger, can be 3,500 at 2-cost, which is not bad. And she just is a very easy raid target to hit. And then what happens when you are reliably hitting that raid target, you are just rapidly seeing more cards and rapidly fueling your sideline. I prefer this over the Squad Zero deck personally, even though the Squad Zero deck is being played more and having better results right now. I wouldn't be surprised, again, kind of like the Sukuna build, I wouldn't be surprised to see this build pop up more once the bigger tournaments come out and people realize how strong this deck actually is. I think people were, again, I've said this before, but I think people were a little turned off by not getting the zero cost Rukia. But I think when people realize how strong this deck still is in English meta, with just having this 2-cost Rukia, and maybe even, throwing in a couple of the 3 costs, people, when they get that speed and the power that unlocks, and they get excited about that, you might see this deck popping off a bit more at tournaments. Now, finally, my pick, I kind of had to go back and forth about this, but my pick, after looking at the meta as a whole for the Fullmetal Alchemist deck that I think is going to do the best once that set comes out, and that my pick for that is the purple homunculus deck. So this is really a pretty crazy deck. The one it's most similar to, if you've played Union Arena to date, it has to be that Muzan deck, the purple Muzan deck from Demon Slayer. It has similar mechanics, however, it's not so focused on sidelining your own characters, which means you don't have to sacrifice your board to get to focus on your end game. You have plenty of strong characters that you can use throughout the game to battle down your opponent, as well as effects that make it really easy, relatively easy, to get 20 cards in your sideline. So let's dive into this a little bit more, this deck that I've been building over here. Your strongest card is actually the Lust character. This is like a Lust engine. This is very similar to the Rukia engine. You're essentially drawing 2 cards and discarding 2 cards. But once you hit 10 cards or more in your sideline, which should be relatively easy to do, you then get to draw another card. So it's kind of like draw 3 sideline 2, which is essentially what Rukia is. And in this kind of a build where you're just trying to build up to 20 cards in your sideline, that's very strong. And she does have this win sideline effect that she gets. You get to return her base rated target. And that's really effective, especially when you consider that your 2 options are the 0-cost Lust, which lets you draw 1 sideline 1, further fueling your sideline, or this 3-cost Lust, which lets you look at the top card of your deck, add it to your hand if it's a homunculus, or just put it on your discard if you want to on top of your deck. Gives you more sideline fuel potentially, or just more resources in your hand. So both are great to be recycling off of your win sideline effect. And all of this, really, the aim of this deck is to get Father out. Before we talk about him, though, let's talk about the Nina and Alexander character. Another great card for getting cards in your sideline. When played, you look at the top 2 cards of your deck and place any of them on top of your deck and the rest into your sideline. So if you want, you can just drop 2 cards into your sideline. And if he was rated, you get a draw card, which is cool. And then also if rated, he gets you added energy gen. So he's definitely a support character, not going to be used for the offensive very often. But between the Nina and Alexander card and the Lust raid, you're just going to be putting so many cards in your sideline so quickly to make this Father card much easier to play. And this Father card's super strong. So it is a 2 action cost character, but only 4 energy gen, which means you don't need to be building up more than 4 energy on your energy line. This card can only be played if you have 20 or more cards in your sideline, and you can't have more than 1 of them on your field. But he comes in active, which Muzan did not. So you don't need to set him up like a turn ahead. You just can play in that turn he comes in. He's swinging with double attack. He's removing a character. He's sidelining an opposing character regardless of their BP. So this is going to work on essentially anyone other than Yellow Saitama. And also, he's a card that you can discard. You don't need to keep him in your hand. He doesn't even need to clog up your hand. If he's in your sideline and you have 20 or more cards in your sideline, you can discard 3 and bring him back to your hand and then play him. So he's really well thought out, and a huge upgrade from like the Muzan kind of play. So this is going to make this deck just so strong. And yeah, all around, I think I really like this sight too. Another reason to have sight removal, if this deck does pop off and is good, this sight is going to make it really easy. Every turn you can just discard a card from the top of your deck, and then eventually you can start drawing cards too. So that's crazy. I think some people will probably run even more than 2 of this. Just all around, I think this is my favorite deck. I think the other one that has potential to be in the S tier, top tier, is that yellow Elric's brother. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say that this is going to be the top deck from that set, and we'll see. I will definitely update you and further either on the website or in future videos on how that shapes up competitively. Now, all that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at the tier list and where we're at. We've covered the S tier, so these are the top most elite decks. The cool thing about Union Arena though is that you don't need to be playing the S tier elite decks to win a tournament. There's a wide range of decks that are still viable. This A tier, these are the decks that are like not quite as elite. Maybe they don't have, they're not as effective in the current meta because they have a little bit of too many disadvantages, but they're still really high functioning decks. You can see the Elric Brothers deck that's coming out, and Fullmetal Alchemist is at the head of the herd. Very strong deck. You can check out my last podcast episode to learn more about that deck. And lots of other favorites: Code Geass, Lancelot. The new blue Mustang should do fairly well. Definitely a solid A pick. Red Asta, Kenpachi, GGO, Blue Ichigo, Tanjiro, the Sisters, Yellow Bleach, Green Saitama, all still very viable picks, even if their win rates are not going to be as well as the S tier, or they're not quite as well positioned against the top tier decks. And then you have the B tier, which these decks are going to feel a lot like A tier decks, but they're just missing a few things to really pop off. But these decks, I've seen these decks do well at big competitions as well as local competitions. So definitely fair picks here. The C tier, these decks can be good. They just need a little bit more luck factor, or a little bit, there are better matchup factors in order to pop off. And then the D tier are decks that you're really not playing to be competitive. These decks you're playing more because you like the engine, or you want to just have some fun. So that's where everything stands post Fullmetal Alchemist. I hope you enjoyed that podcast / video if you're watching on YouTube. Lots of great things. I think this is the most fun time so far. The Union Arena metagame just gets more and more fun. I think it's just fantastic to have such a diverse range of decks to choose from. And yeah, I think great things are still in store for us with plenty more Volume 2s to come. So with all of that being said, I'm looking forward to more things to come. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe. And again, check out the website, www.josephryderanderson.com, for the latest stuff, the latest updates, the latest content and news for what's coming up next.